I didn't think about consequences when I stepped into the road. I just knew that if I stopped running, they would find me. The rain came down hard, each drop hitting my skin like tiny needles, soaking through my jacket, blurring my vision until the world became nothing but streaks of light and shadow. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept going, slipping on the wet pavement as I glanced over my shoulder. The black SUV was still there. Too close. Too patient. They weren't rushing anymore. They didn't have to. They knew I was running out of places to go. My breath caught in my throat as my foot hit the curb wrong, sending a jolt of pain up my ankle, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The street ahead was empty. No people, no stores open. Just a stretch of asphalt reflecting the glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic. For a split second, everything slowed. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. The world narrowed to one choice. Run forward or get caught. Headlights appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the rain like a blade. Bright. Blinding. Fast. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight into the light. Tires screamed. The sound tore through the night, sharp and violent, echoing off the empty buildings. I threw my hands up, stumbling as the car stopped inches from me, the heat of the engine brushing against my soaked clothes. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then I slammed my palms against the hood, my voice breaking as I forced the words out. Please, don't let them take me. The engine idled beneath my hands, steady, controlled, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just thrown myself in front of it. The driver's side door opened slowly, not rushed, not startled, just deliberate. My heart pounded harder as I took a step back, my shoes slipping slightly on the wet road. The man who stepped out didn't look confused. He didn't look angry. He looked calm, too calm. He was tall, at least 6'2", dressed in a dark suit that somehow hadn't a wrinkle despite the storm. His movements precise, measured, like every second belonged to him. Rain slid off his shoulders as if it didn't dare linger. His eyes found mine instantly. Dark, steady, unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world felt suspended, like everything else had fallen away. Then he glanced past me, toward the end of the street. I didn't need to turn around to know what he saw. The SUV had stopped. Doors opening. Figures stepping out. My chest tightened, panic clawing its way back up my throat. Please, I whispered again, my voice barely holding together. I'll do anything. Just don't let them open the door. His voice cut through mine, low and controlled, not loud but impossible to ignore. I froze. The command wasn't directed at me. 2 more doors opened behind him. Men stepped out, dressed like him, moving with the same quiet precision. One of them pulled the back door open without a word. I stared at them, my mind scrambling to catch up. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. The men behind me were getting closer. I could hear their footsteps now, steady against the pavement, unhurried. They thought they had already won. My pulse spiked. I looked back at the man in front of me, the stranger whose car I had just thrown myself into, and for the first time, doubt flickered through my fear. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't hesitating. He was deciding. Get in, he said. Not harsh. Not urgent. Certain. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling at my sides. Every instinct I had screamed that this was another mistake, that I was trading one danger for another. But behind me, I already knew what waited. And in front of me, I had no idea. My breath came in shallow bursts as I moved, step by step, toward the open door. The moment I slid into the seat, the world shifted. The door shut with a solid, final sound. Locked. Sealed. Trapping me inside. Or protecting me. I couldn't tell which. The man walked around the front of the car, his expression unchanged, as if none of this surprised him. As if this was just another night. Another decision. Another life stepping into his orbit. When he got back behind the wheel, he didn't look at me right away. His gaze stayed forward, watching something I couldn't see. Outside, the rain kept falling. And somewhere behind us, everything I had been running from was getting closer. The silence inside the car felt louder than the storm outside, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest until I could barely draw a full breath. Rain streaked across the windows in endless lines, turning the outside world into a blur of distorted light, but I could still feel them out there, the men I had been running from, closing the distance one step at a time. My hands rested in my lap, trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists just to keep still, my nails digging into my palms as if pain could anchor me to reality. The man beside me did not rush. He did not panic. He simply watched through the windshield, his posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel as though we were waiting at a red light, instead of sitting in the middle of something I could not even name. I forced myself to turn my head, just slightly, enough to see his profile. Sharp lines. Controlled breathing. No fear. Not even tension. It was like the storm, the men, me crashing into his car. None of it mattered to him at all. The back doors of the SUV behind us opened wider, and shapes moved through the rain, blurred but unmistakable. My throat tightened. "They are coming," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. He did not answer right away. Instead, his fingers tapped once against the steering wheel, slow and deliberate, like he was counting something only he could see. Then, without looking at me, he spoke. "Stay in the car." The words were simple, but there was something final about them, something that made my body obey before my mind could question it. One of the men who had stepped out earlier moved past my window, his figure blocking what little light filtered through the storm. I could not hear what was said outside. I could only see movement, shadows shifting, gestures exchanged. The men who had been chasing me stopped several feet away, their confidence faltering just enough for me to notice. My breath hitched. Something had changed. The balance had shifted, and I did not understand how or why. The man beside me still had not moved. Not a single sudden motion, not a flicker of urgency. Just control. Absolute control. I pressed my back against the seat, trying to make myself smaller, invisible, but my eyes would not leave the scene unfolding beyond the glass. One of the figures from the SUV took a step forward, then stopped again, as if reconsidering. Another second passed, then another, and slowly, impossibly, they began to step back. Confusion flickered through my fear. That was not how this was supposed to go. They had been so sure before, so relentless. Now they were retreating like something unseen had just rewritten the rules. The man in the driver's seat exhaled softly, almost inaudible, and only then did he finally turn his head toward me. His gaze met mine fully this time, and I felt it like a physical force, steady and unyielding. "You are shaking," he said, his tone calm, observational, as if he were stating a simple fact. I realized then that I was. Every part of me, from my hands to my shoulders, trembling, without control. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "I thought you were going to leave me out there," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Something shifted in his expression, not softer, not warmer, but something more focused. "You ran into my car," he replied. "That makes you my responsibility." The sentence should not have made me feel safer. It should have done the opposite. But there was something in the way he said it, something grounded and certain, that made the panic in my chest loosen just a fraction. Outside, the last of the men stepped back into their vehicle. The doors shut. The engine started. And just like that, they were gone, disappearing into the rain as if they had never been there at all. I stared after them, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. They had let me go. No, not let me go. They had been forced to. I turned back to him slowly. "Who are you?" The question felt small compared to everything else, but it was all I had. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached forward and adjusted something on the dashboard, the engine humming slightly louder beneath us. The car began to move, smooth and controlled, pulling away from the spot where my entire world had nearly ended minutes ago. "Someone you should not have met tonight," he said finally. My chest tightened again, But this time it was not fear alone. It was something else. Something heavier. Because deep down, I knew he was right. And somehow, I also knew that. Walking away was no longer an option. The city lights stretched into long, wavering lines as the car moved through the rain, each reflection sliding across the glass like something trying to catch up and failing, and I sat there in the passenger seat, soaked to the bone, my heartbeat still refusing to slow down, as if it did not believe the danger was over, as if it knew something I did not. The man beside me drove without hesitation, his movements smooth and precise, one hand steady on the wheel while the other rested near the center console, relaxed but ready, like someone who never truly let his guard down. I watched him from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what I had just stepped into, because this did not feel like safety, not in the way normal people understood it. This felt like stepping into a different kind of storm, quieter, colder, controlled. "Where are we going?" I asked finally, my voice steadier than I expected, though my fingers still twisted together in my lap. He did not answer right away. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable for him, but suffocating for me, until he turned the wheel slightly, and the car glided onto a wider street, the buildings around us growing taller, cleaner, more distant from the chaos I had just escaped. "Somewhere they will not follow," he said at last. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, but it did not bring relief, not completely, because the way he said it carried certainty, not hope, and that meant he knew exactly who they were, exactly what they were capable of, and exactly how to stay out of their reach. I pressed my back into the seat, trying to gather my thoughts, but they came in fragments, scattered and sharp. The black SUV, the men, the way they had stopped when they saw him. My eyes drifted to his hands, steady on the wheel, no tremor, no hesitation, and I realized something that made my stomach tighten. He had not been surprised. Not for a single second. "You knew they would back off," I said quietly. It was not a question. He glanced at me briefly, just long enough for our eyes to meet before returning his attention to the road. "I knew they would think twice," he corrected. That did not make me feel better. The car slowed as we approached an intersection, the red light reflecting off the wet pavement, casting a dull glow across his face. For the first time, I noticed the small details I had missed before, the faint shadow along his jaw, the subtle crease between his brows, the kind that came from focus, not stress, and something else, something harder to define, like he carried the weight of decisions most people never had to make. I swallowed, forcing myself to speak again. "If they had not stopped," I began, my voice faltering slightly, "what would you have done?" The question lingered in the space between us, heavier than I intended, and for a moment, I thought he might ignore it. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening just slightly on the steering wheel before relaxing again. "You would still be in this car," he said. The light turned green. He pressed the accelerator gently, and the car moved forward without another word. I looked away, my gaze dropping to my hands, still damp, still shaking, and I realized that whatever answer I had been expecting, it was not that. It was not a threat. It was not reassurance. It was something in between, something that made it clear that being here, beside him, was not an accident anymore. It was a decision, one he had already made. The streets grew quieter as we moved farther from the center of the city, the buildings giving way to taller gates, longer driveways, places that felt removed from everything else, like they existed on their own rules. My chest tightened again, not with panic this time, but with a slow, creeping awareness that I was being taken somewhere I could not simply walk away from. "You still have not told me your name," I said, my voice softer now, almost cautious. This time, he did not delay. "Adrian," he replied. Just that. No last name. No explanation. The name settled into my mind, heavy in a way I could not explain, like it carried meaning beyond the simple sound of it. "Emily," I said after a second, realizing he had never asked. He nodded once, acknowledging it, as if he had already known. The car turned again, this time through a set of gates that opened before we even reached them, silent and automatic, revealing a long driveway lined with dim lights that cut through the darkness. My breath caught. This was not a hotel, not a public place. This was private, intentional, final. The car rolled to a smooth stop in front of a structure that rose out of the night, like something carved from shadow and glass, its windows glowing faintly against the storm. For a moment, neither of us moved. The engine idled softly, the only sound in the stillness that followed. Then Adrian turned toward me fully, his gaze steady, impossible to avoid. "You are safe here," he said. The words should have been comforting. They were not. Because I understood now that safety, in his world, did not come without conditions. And as I sat there, staring back at him, I realized I had already crossed a line I could not uncross, the moment I chose his car over the darkness behind me. The engine shut off with a soft click, and the sudden quiet felt louder than everything that had come before it, like the world had paused just long enough for me to realize how far I had already gone and how little control I had left. I stared through the windshield at the house in front of us, if it could even be called a house, because it looked more like something designed to be untouchable, all sharp lines and dark glass, every light placed with intention, every shadow deliberate, as if even the building itself understood power. My fingers tightened in my lap again, the damp fabric of my clothes clinging to my skin, cold and uncomfortable, grounding me in a reality that still did not feel real. I should have asked to leave. I should have opened the door and run before it locked me into something I could not understand. But I did not move. I did not even reach for the handle. Because somewhere deep inside, I already knew that walking away was no longer as simple as opening a door. Adrian stepped out first. The moment his door closed, the space around the car seemed to shift again, subtle but undeniable, like the air itself adjusted to his presence. The front doors of the house opened before he even reached them, two figures appearing in the doorway, dressed the same way as the men from before, composed, watchful, already aware of his arrival. He did not look back at me. He did not need to. One of the men moved toward my side of the car, stopping just short of the door, waiting. Not forcing, not rushing. Waiting. I hesitated, my hand hovering near the handle, my pulse picking up again as the weight of the moment settled over me. This was the point where everything changed. Not the street, not the chase, not even the moment I ran into his car. The choice to step out. I exhaled slowly, forcing my hand to move, pushing the door open as the cool night air hit my face again, carrying the scent of rain and something cleaner, quieter, like this place existed separate from everything else. My shoes touched the ground, and for a second, I just stood there, looking up at the building, trying to make sense of it, trying to find something familiar, something normal, and failing. "This way," the man beside me said, his voice calm, neutral, not unkind but not inviting either. I followed, because I did not know what else to do. The entrance swallowed me in silence. The moment I stepped inside, the sound of the rain faded, replaced by something softer, controlled, the faint hum of air conditioning, the distant echo of footsteps somewhere deeper in the house. Everything was spotless, every surface polished, every detail intentional, like nothing here was left to chance. I felt out of place immediately, my wet clothes, my unsteady breathing, the way my hands still would not stop trembling. Adrian was already halfway across the room, removing his jacket with a smooth motion, handing it off to someone without even looking, as if this was routine, as if nothing about tonight had disrupted his world at all. I stopped a few feet inside, unsure whether to follow, unsure whether I even belonged here, and for the first time since I got into the car, doubt hit me hard enough to make me take a step back. "I should go," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them, quieter than I intended but sharp enough to cut through the stillness. Adrian paused, not fully turning, just enough that I knew he had heard me. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then he turned, slowly, his gaze finding mine again with that same steady intensity that made it impossible to look away. Go where? He asked. The question landed heavier than I expected because I did not have an answer. Not one that made sense anymore. My apartment was not safe. The streets were not safe. Even the police, the thought of explaining any of this, felt distant and uncertain. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, the truth settling in whether I wanted it to or not. I had nowhere to go. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like he had been waiting for me to realize that on my own. You can leave, he said, his voice calm, measured, giving me the illusion of choice. But they will be waiting. My chest tightened again, the memory of the SUV, the men, the way they had followed me without hesitation flashing through my mind. I knew he was right. That was the worst part. He stepped closer, not invading my space, not reaching for me, just closing the distance enough to make his presence undeniable. Or you can stay, he continued, his tone unchanged, as if both options held equal weight, even though we both knew they did not. I swallowed hard, my eyes dropping for a second before lifting back to his. And if I stay? I asked, the question barely above a whisper. For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softer, not warmer, but more certain, more defined. Then you are under my protection, he said. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like something else entirely. Not a promise, not a favor, a line drawn. And as I stood there, soaked, exhausted, and completely out of options, I realized that protection, in his world, was never free. The word protection lingered in the air between us, heavier than anything else he had said, as if it carried rules I did not understand yet, but would soon be forced to learn. And I stood there, still dripping rainwater onto his polished floor, trying to decide if staying meant safety or surrender, because it felt like both at the same time. My throat tightened as I searched his face for something human, something uncertain, but all I found was control, steady and unshaken, like he had already calculated every possible outcome and chosen this one long before I ever stepped into his car. What does that mean? I asked quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, because if I was going to stay, even for a moment, I needed to understand what I was agreeing to. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved past me, his steps slow, deliberate, as if he expected me to follow, and without realizing it, I did. The room opened into a larger space, high ceilings, dim lighting, everything designed to feel calm and controlled, like nothing chaotic could exist here unless he allowed it. He stopped near a wide window, the rain still falling outside, distant now, muted behind layers of glass and silence. It means they will not touch you, he said finally, his voice low, measured, as if the statement itself was enough to settle the matter. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, more to stop the shaking than anything else. And what do you get in return? The question slipped out before I could soften it, but I did not take it back. I could not afford to. His gaze shifted to me again, sharper this time, more focused, like I had just moved from background to something worth studying. For a moment, he said nothing, and the silence stretched long enough to make my pulse pick up again. Then he took another step closer, not threatening, not forceful, just enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. Honesty, he said. The answer caught me off guard. Of all the things I had expected, that was not one of them. That is it? I asked, unable to hide the doubt in my voice. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, something that made it clear I was missing the weight behind the word. For now, he replied. That did not help. If anything, it made everything more complicated, because it meant there was more, something unspoken, something waiting. My fingers tightened against my arms as I looked away, my thoughts racing again, trying to piece together what he already seemed to know. They were not random, he continued, his tone shifting slightly, less like a statement, more like an observation. You did not just run into them by accident. I froze. The truth pressed against the inside of my chest, heavy and uncomfortable, and for a second, I considered lying, giving him something simple, something easy, but something about the way he watched me made it impossible. He would know. I saw something. I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper, the memory flashing through my mind. Too fast, too sharp, something I had not even fully processed yet. I was not supposed to. He did not interrupt. He did not react. He simply waited. And somehow, that made it easier to continue. I was leaving work, I said, the words coming slowly now, uneven but steady enough to keep going. There was a car in the parking lot. The doors were open. I thought someone needed help. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening again as the memory sharpened. They did not. And they saw me. The room felt smaller after that, like the walls had moved closer without warning, and I forced myself to breathe, to stay present, even as the fear threatened to pull me back under. Adrian studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, his silence deliberate, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. Then you are not just a witness, he said. You are a problem. The words hit harder than anything else he had said, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I felt it settle in my chest, heavy and undeniable, and for the first time, I understood exactly why those men had not stopped chasing me. I lifted my gaze to meet his again, my fear no longer just about what had happened, but about what would come next. So what happens now? I asked, because I needed to know, even if I was not ready for the answer. Adrian held my gaze, steady, unflinching, like he had already decided that too. Now, he said, his voice calm, controlled, final, you stay where I can see you. And in that moment, I realized that protection, in his world, did not just mean keeping danger out. It meant keeping me in. The words stayed with me longer than they should have, echoing in the quiet space around us like something carved into the walls, something I could not ignore even if I wanted to. And I stood there trying to steady my breathing while the weight of what he said settled deeper into my chest, because being seen, truly seen, by someone like him did not feel like safety. It felt like exposure. I shifted my weight slightly, my shoes still damp against the smooth floor, and for the first time since stepping inside, I became painfully aware of how out of place I looked. Soaked clothes, tangled hair, the faint tremor that refused to leave my hands, like I had carried the storm in with me and it had not yet decided to let go. Adrian's gaze lingered for a second longer before he turned away, not dismissing me, just moving on as if the decision had already been made and there was nothing left to debate. You need to change, he said, his tone returning to that calm, controlled cadence that made everything sound less like a suggestion and more like a fact. I blinked, caught off guard by the shift. I do not have anything with me, I replied, the obviousness of the statement making it sound smaller than it felt. He did not look back. You will, he said simply, and with that, one of the figures standing near the hallway moved without hesitation, as if they had been waiting for the instruction before it was even spoken. The efficiency of it made my chest tighten again. Nothing here was accidental. Nothing here was delayed. Everything happened because he allowed it. I followed the man down a quiet corridor, the sound of my footsteps soft against the floor, my senses still too sharp, picking up every small detail, the faint scent of clean linen, the low hum of lighting, the absence of anything chaotic or uncontrolled. It felt unreal, like stepping into a place that had been carefully designed to erase everything messy, everything uncertain, everything human. The door he opened led into a room that was larger than my entire apartment. Warm lighting, neutral colors, everything arranged with a precision that made it feel untouched, like no one had ever truly lived there. You can use this, he said, stepping aside, his voice polite but distant, offering the space without explanation. I hesitated at the threshold, my mind still catching up to everything that had happened in the past hour. The street, the chase, the car, Adrian, all of it blending together into something that did not feel like my life anymore. But I stepped inside anyway, because there was no version of this where I could go back to what existed before. The door closed quietly behind me, and for the first time since I started running, I was alone. Completely alone. The silence pressed in again, but this time it was different. Not sharp, not urgent, just heavy, like it was waiting for me to finally process everything I had been pushing aside. I moved slowly, almost cautiously, toward the bathroom, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror as I passed. I barely recognized the person staring back. Pale, exhausted, eyes wide with something that had not fully settled into fear or relief, just a raw, exposed awareness that everything had changed. I turned on the water, watching the steam rise as it filled the space, trying to focus on something simple, something normal, the sound of running water, the warmth against my skin when I stepped under it, the way it washed away the rain, the dirt, the tension that had built up in every muscle. But it did not wash away the feeling in my chest. That stayed. When I finished, I found clothes waiting for me, folded neatly on the counter, as if someone had known exactly what I would need before I even asked. Soft fabric, simple, comfortable, nothing extravagant, but nothing accidental either. I hesitated for a second before putting them on, the realization settling deeper that even something as small as this, had been decided for me. When I stepped back into the room, everything was exactly as I'd left it, untouched, unchanged, like time moved differently here. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what came next, unsure of where I was supposed to go, until a soft knock at the door broke the stillness. "He is waiting," a voice said from the other side, calm, neutral, carrying the same quiet authority I had begun to recognize in everyone here. My pulse picked up again, not as fast as before, but enough to remind me that this was not over, not even close. I reached for the door, my hand pausing for just a second before I opened it, because stepping out meant stepping back into his world, into whatever came next, into something I could not control. But staying inside would not change that. Nothing would. So I stepped out, following the hallway back the way I came, each step slower than the last, until I saw him again, standing exactly where I had left him, like he had not moved at all, like he had been waiting for me the entire time. His eyes lifted the moment I approached, taking in the change, the difference, not with surprise, not with approval, just with quiet acknowledgement. "Better," he said, his voice calm, as if this was simply the next step in a process that had already been set in motion. I stopped a few feet away, my hands at my sides, steadier now, but not still, because something about the way he looked at me made it clear that this was not about comfort or appearance. This was about control, and I was starting to understand that everything here, every room, every choice, every moment, existed inside it. I felt his eyes on me before I fully stopped walking, that same steady awareness that seemed to track every movement, every breath, like nothing I did went unnoticed, and it made my steps slow without me meaning to, like I was adjusting to a rhythm I did not understand yet, but could not ignore. The clothes felt different against my skin, dry, warm, a contrast to the cold that had followed me inside, but the tension in my chest had not faded. It had only changed shape, less sharp, more constant, like something waiting. Adrian stood near the window again, one hand resting lightly against the edge of a table, his posture relaxed but deliberate, as if even stillness was a choice he made carefully. When I stopped a few feet away, he did not speak immediately. His gaze moved over me once, not intrusive, not lingering, just enough to confirm what he needed to see, and then it returned to my face, steady and focused. "Sit," he said. The word was quiet, but it carried weight, not a command that demanded force, but one that expected to be followed. I hesitated for half a second, just enough to notice it, just enough to realize that part of me wanted to resist, wanted to push back against the way everything here seemed to move around his decisions. But I sat anyway, lowering myself onto the edge of a chair across from him, my hands resting in my lap, still but not relaxed. He moved to the other side of the table, taking his seat with the same controlled ease, the distance between us intentional, measured, like he understood exactly how much space to leave. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence settled again, but this time it felt different, not empty, but expectant, like something was about to be decided. "Start from the beginning," he said finally, his voice calm, even, giving nothing away. I swallowed, my mind immediately pulling back to the moment everything shifted, the parking lot, the open doors, the feeling that something was wrong before I even understood why. "I told you." I began, my voice quieter now, more controlled, because saying it again made it more real, more permanent. I saw something I was not supposed to. He did not interrupt. He did not question. He simply waited, his attention fixed, unbroken, and somehow that made it impossible to stop. "I work late," I continued, my fingers tightening slightly against each other. "The lot is usually empty. Tonight it was not." I paused, the memory pressing harder, clearer now that I was forcing myself to face it. There was a car. The doors were open. I thought someone needed help. My voice faltered for a second, but I kept going. I walked closer. That is when I realized. I trailed off, not because I could not remember, but because saying it out loud felt like crossing another line. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, like he was listening more closely now. "Realized what?" he asked, his tone steady, not pushing, not softening. I took a breath, forcing the words out. That they were not waiting for help. They were waiting for something else. The room felt quieter after that, the air heavier, like the truth had settled into it. I looked up at him, searching for some kind of reaction, some indication of what he was thinking, but his face remained controlled, unreadable. "Did they see you clearly?" he asked after a moment. I nodded, the answer immediate, unavoidable. "Yes." His gaze held mine for a second longer, then shifted slightly, his focus turning inward, calculating, piecing something together that I could not see. "And you ran," he said, more statement than question. I did not have a choice. I replied, a hint of defensiveness slipping into my voice before I could stop it. His eyes returned to me, sharper now, more direct. "You always have a choice," he said quietly. The words landed differently than I expected, not judgment, not criticism, just a fact stated without emotion. I held his gaze, something in me pushing back despite everything. "Then I chose to survive," I said. For the first time, there was the smallest shift in his expression, not quite approval, not quite surprise, just acknowledgement, like I had said something worth noting. He leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against the table, his posture still controlled but less rigid, like the conversation had moved into a different space. "And now you are here," he said. I exhaled slowly, the weight of that truth settling in again. "Because I ran into the wrong car," I replied. A pause followed, brief but noticeable, and then he shook his head once, slow, deliberate. "No," he said. My brow furrowed slightly, confusion cutting through the tension. "No." He met my gaze fully, his expression steady, certain. "Because you ran into the only car that would stop," he corrected. The words caught me off guard, not because of what they meant, but because of how certain he sounded, like this had never been chance, never been random, like the moment I stepped into his path had already changed everything before I even understood it. My breath slowed slightly, not calm, not steady, but different, like something inside me was shifting in response to something I could not yet define. And as I sat there, across from him, in a place that felt both safe and dangerous at the same time, I realized that whatever came next was not going to be about escaping anymore. It was going to be about understanding why he chose to stop. His words stayed with me longer than anything else he had said, not loud, not forceful, but certain in a way that made them impossible to ignore. And I sat there trying to understand what it meant that he believed I had not chosen the wrong path, that somehow, in a moment of panic, I had found the only option that would not end with me disappearing into something I could not escape. My fingers rested loosely in my lap now, not steady, not calm, but no longer trembling the way they had before, as if my body was slowly catching up to the fact that I was still here, still breathing, still able to think. Adrian watched me in silence for a few seconds, his gaze measured, as if he was waiting for something, not a reaction, not a response, just the moment when I understood enough to move forward. You said they were waiting, he continued, his voice even, grounded, pulling the conversation back into focus. I nodded slowly, replaying the scene again in my mind, every detail sharper now that I was forced to face it without the adrenaline of running. They were not surprised to see me, I said, the realization settling deeper as I spoke. It was like they already knew someone might come. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought, like he was connecting something I could not see yet. And the car, he asked, did you recognize it? I shook my head immediately. No. It was dark. Expensive, I think, but I do not know cars like that. A brief pause followed, and then he leaned back slightly, his posture shifting into something more contemplative, less focused on me and more on the situation itself. Then it was not random, he said quietly. It was planned. The word hung in the air, heavier than anything before it, because it changed everything. Plan meant intention. Plan meant purpose. Plan meant I had stepped into something much larger than I had understood in that moment. My chest tightened again, not with panic this time, but with something colder, something more controlled, like fear was turning into awareness. Why would they be there? I asked, my voice softer now, less defensive, more searching. Adrian did not answer right away. Instead, he studied me again, not just looking, but assessing, like he was measuring what I could handle, what I was ready to hear. That depends, he said finally, on what you saw. I hesitated, my mind pulling back to the details I had tried not to think about. The way the doors were open, the way the men moved, the way everything felt wrong before I even understood why. There was something in the back, I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. A case. They were focused on it. Not on me. Not at first. His gaze sharpened immediately, the shift subtle but undeniable, like that detail mattered more than anything else I had said. Describe it, he said. I swallowed, forcing myself to remember clearly. Black. Hard. Shell. About this size. I lifted my hand slightly, indicating the shape, the weight I had only glimpsed but somehow still remembered. They were careful with it. Too careful. The room felt quiet again, but this time it was different. This time it felt like something had clicked into place, something I could not see, but he could. Adrian stood slowly, moving away from the table, his steps measured as he crossed the room toward the window again, his reflection faint against the glass as the rain continued to fall outside. You were not meant to see that, he said, more to himself than to me. I stood as well, not because he told me to, but because sitting suddenly felt wrong, like I needed to stay alert, to stay aware of whatever was unfolding around me. I did not want to. I replied, the truth in the words heavier than I expected. I just walked into it. He turned slightly, his gaze finding mine again, and for a moment, there was something different there, something less distant, less controlled, like he understood that part, the part where everything changed without warning. That is usually how it happens, he said quietly. A brief silence followed, not empty, but filled with something unspoken, something shifting beneath the surface of everything we had said so far. Then his expression changed again, the softness, if it had ever been there, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same steady control. From now on, he said, his voice firm but not raised, You do not move through this house alone. The words landed with a different kind of weight. Not fear, not panic, but restriction, clear and undeniable. I frowned slightly, confusion mixing with something sharper. You said I was safe here, I pointed out, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. He did not look away. You are, he replied. But safety requires structure. The explanation did not make it easier to accept, but it made it harder to argue against. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders tightening slightly as I processed what that meant. And if I do not follow that structure? I asked, testing the boundary, needing to understand where it truly stood. Adrian held my gaze, steady, unyielding, and for the first time since I met him, there was no hesitation in his answer. Then you make it harder for me to keep you alive. The words were calm, controlled, but they carried a finality that left no room for misunderstanding. I stood there, the weight of everything pressing down at once, the chase, the house, the rules, him, all of it forming something I could not step out of anymore. And in that moment, I realized that survival was no longer just about running. It was about staying exactly where he said. The silence that followed his words did not feel empty. It felt defined, like a boundary had just been drawn in front of me, and I could either respect it or collide with it. And I stood there trying to steady my breathing while the reality of my situation settled into something heavier than panic, something closer to acceptance, even if I was not ready to admit it yet. My eyes stayed on him, searching for any sign that what he said could be negotiated, softened, changed, but there was nothing there to suggest that, only that same controlled certainty that had followed him since the moment I stepped into his world. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders tightening before I forced them to relax, because pushing against him right now would not help me, and I was starting to understand that survival here was not just about instinct. It was about reading the room, reading him, knowing when to speak and when to stay still. Fine, I said quietly, the word tasting unfamiliar in my mouth. Not surrender, but not defiance either, something in between. Adrian studied me for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of that response, then gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to signal that for now, it was enough. He turned slightly, his attention shifting toward the far side of the room, where one of the men stood waiting, silent and still, like a shadow that only moved when called. Make sure she has what she needs, Adrian said without raising his voice. The instruction was simple, but the man nodded immediately, stepping forward with the same quiet efficiency I had come to expect from everyone here. I felt my chest tighten again, not from fear this time, but from the realization that I was no longer just reacting to events. I was being managed within them. I can take care of myself, I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out sharper than I intended. Adrian's gaze returned to me instantly, not angry, not irritated, just focused, like he had been expecting that response. I am sure you can, he replied calmly. But tonight, you do not have to. The answer caught me off guard, not because it contradicted what I said, but because it did not dismiss it either. It left room for both truths to exist at the same time, and that made it harder to argue against. I looked away for a second, my thoughts shifting again, trying to find something solid to hold on to in all of this, some sense of control that still belonged to me. What about my phone? I asked, the question coming out quieter now, more careful. My job. People are going to notice I am gone. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was a brief pause before he answered, like he was deciding how much to say. That will be handled, he said simply. My head snapped back toward him, confusion and frustration mixing together. Handled how? I pressed, unable to let it go. You cannot just make me disappear. The words hung between us, heavier than I intended, and for a moment, I wondered if I had pushed too far. But Adrian did not react the way I expected. He did not shut me down. He did not ignore the question. Instead, he stepped closer again, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else feel distant. "I am not making you disappear," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. "I am making sure no one else can." The distinction settled into me slowly, and I realized that in his world, those two things might not be as different as I wanted them to be. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, the tension returning in a quieter, more controlled way. "And what happens when this is over?" I asked, the question coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere that needed to believe there was an end to this. Adrian held my gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something I could not immediately read, something that did not fit neatly into control or calculation. "We are not there yet," he said. It was not the answer I wanted, but it was the only one he was willing to give. The man beside us cleared his throat softly, not interrupting, just reminding us of his presence, and Adrian gave a slight nod without looking away from me. "He will show you the rest of the house," Adrian said. "You should know where you are." The instruction was simple, but the meaning behind it was not. This was not just about orientation. This was about understanding the space I was now part of, the boundaries I was expected to stay within. I hesitated for a second, my eyes lingering on Adrian, searching again for something more, something that would make this feel less like a controlled environment and more like a place I could exist in without constantly measuring every step. But there was nothing new to find, just the same steady presence, the same quiet authority. I turned slowly, following the man toward the hallway, my footsteps softer now, more deliberate, as if I had already begun adjusting to the rules I had been given. But as I walked, I could still feel Adrian's gaze on me, not watching to control, not watching to intimidate, but watching to make sure I stayed exactly where I was supposed to be. And for reasons I could not fully explain, that awareness did not just make me uneasy. It made me feel like leaving was no longer just dangerous. It was impossible. The hallway stretched longer than I expected, each step echoing softly beneath my feet, the sound almost too quiet, like even noise had rules here, like everything was designed to exist within limits I could not yet see but was already beginning to feel. The man walking beside me kept a steady pace, not rushing, not slowing, just guiding, and I followed without speaking, my attention shifting between the details around me and the weight of Adrian's presence still lingering somewhere behind me, even though I could no longer see him. The walls were lined with subtle lighting, soft and deliberate, casting shadows that never fully settled, and the air felt different here, cooler, more controlled, like the outside world had been completely sealed away. "How big is this place?" I asked quietly, more to fill the silence than anything else, but also because I needed something tangible to hold on to, something measurable. "Large enough," the man replied, his tone neutral, offering nothing more than the bare minimum. I nodded, slightly, not expecting more, but the answer still left me unsettled, because it was not about size, it was about scale, about how easily someone could get lost inside it, not just physically, but mentally. We turned a corner, the space opening into another section of the house, wider, more open, with glass walls that looked out onto a courtyard I had not noticed from the outside. The rain had softened now, falling in lighter drops, tapping gently against the glass, a quieter version of the storm that had followed me here. I slowed for a second, drawn to the view. The contrast between the chaos I had left and the stillness in front of me almost disorienting. "You are not a prisoner," the man said suddenly, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked at him, surprised by the statement. "It does not feel that simple," I admitted. He did not argue. He did not correct me. He simply continued walking, as if the conversation had already reached its end. That unsettled me more than if he had tried to convince me otherwise. We passed through another doorway, this one leading into a space that felt less formal, more lived in, though still precise, still controlled. A long table sat in the center, untouched, perfectly arranged, like it was waiting for something that had not happened yet. "This is where meals are served," he said. I glanced at the table, then back at him. And if I am not hungry? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. You will still sit, he replied. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite frustration, just a release of tension that had nowhere else to go. Of course, I murmured. The pattern was becoming clearer now. Choice existed, but only within boundaries that had already been defined. We continued moving, the tour unfolding in quiet segments, each room revealing another piece of the structure I was now part of, the layout, the flow, the way everything connected without ever feeling chaotic. There were no wasted spaces here, no areas left to chance. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a place, including me. That thought settled deeper than I wanted it to. Do you all live here? I asked after a moment, my voice softer now, more thoughtful than before. Some of us, he answered. Others come and go. I nodded again, absorbing the information, trying to map out what that meant, how many people were here at any given time, how many eyes, how many unseen movements existed just beyond my awareness. It was not fear that settled in this time. It was understanding. This place was not just a house. It was a system, and I had stepped into it without knowing the rules. We stopped near another set of windows, this time overlooking the front entrance, the long driveway I had arrived on stretching out into the distance, the gates barely visible through the mist and rain. I moved closer without thinking, my gaze tracing the path, measuring it, calculating how far it would take to reach the exit, how long it would take to run. The thought came automatically, instinctively, but it did not stay the same way it would have before. Because now I understood something I had not before. Running would not get me out. You were thinking about leaving, the man said calmly. I did not turn to look at him. Would that surprise you? I asked. No, he replied. But it would be ineffective. I exhaled slowly, my reflection faint in the glass, my own eyes staring back at me with a clarity I had not felt earlier. He was right. Again. Not because I lacked the ability to run, but because I no longer understood the boundaries well enough to escape them. I stepped back from the window, the weight of that realization settling in a quieter, more permanent way. He is not keeping you here to trap you, the man added after a moment. Then why? I asked, turning to face him now, needing to hear something that made sense. He held my gaze briefly before answering. Because if you leave, they will find you before you can find safety. The words were not new. I had heard them in different forms since I arrived. But hearing them again, here, after seeing everything else, after understanding even a fraction of what this place was, made them land differently. Not as a warning, as a fact. I looked back toward the window one last time, the rain still falling, the path still there, unchanged, but no longer an option. And as I stood there, in a place that was both protection and confinement, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. Staying was not just the safest choice anymore. It was the only one that made sense. The realization did not hit all at once. It settled in slowly, like the quiet rain outside that refused to stop, steady and persistent, until everything was soaked through. And I stood there staring at my reflection in the glass, knowing that the version of me who had run into the street no longer existed in the same way, because that version still believed there was somewhere else to go. I turned away from the window, my steps slower now, more deliberate, as if I was beginning to understand that movement here meant something different, that every direction led somewhere chosen, not random. The man beside me remained silent, watching without watching, giving me space without actually leaving me alone, and that contradiction stayed with me as we walked back through the corridor, the same walls, the same quiet, but it felt different now, less foreign, more defined. When we reached the main room again, Adrian was exactly where I had left him, standing near the table, his posture unchanged, as if time had not moved at all while I was gone. His eyes lifted the moment I entered, not surprised, not questioning, just aware, like he had already known when I would return. I stopped a few feet away, the distance between us feeling intentional, necessary, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I realized then that the silence no longer felt as heavy as it had before. It was still there, still present, but it did not press against me in the same way. It waited. "You have seen enough for tonight," he said finally, his voice calm, measured, as if he had already decided the next step before I even came back into the room. I nodded slightly, not because I agreed, but because I understood that the day, or whatever this was, had reached a point where thinking any further would not change anything. My mind was full already, overloaded with details, rules, possibilities that did not feel like options. "What happens now?" I asked, the question coming out softer than before, less defensive, more grounded. Adrian studied me for a second, his gaze steady. Then he moved, not quickly, not slowly, just with purpose, crossing the space between us until he stood close enough that I could feel the shift in the air again, that subtle change that seemed to follow him wherever he went. "Now you rest," he said. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it felt almost normal, something that belonged to a different context, a different life. "I do not think I can," I admitted quietly, the truth slipping out without resistance. My thoughts were still racing, my body still adjusting, my awareness still too sharp to settle into anything resembling calm. Adrian did not argue. He did not dismiss it. Instead, he reached past me, not touching, just close enough to open a small drawer in the table behind me, pulling something out and placing it gently on the surface between us. A glass of water. Simple, clear, uncomplicated. "Drink," he said. I blinked, the gesture so ordinary that it felt out of place in everything else that had happened, but I reached for it anyway, my fingers wrapping around the cool surface, grounding me in something real, something immediate. I took a sip, then another, the steady motion helping more than I expected, slowing my breathing just enough to notice the difference. "Your body is still in the moment you were running," he continued, his voice lower now, not softer, just closer. "It will take time to catch up." I looked up at him, surprised by the observation, by the accuracy of it, because he was right. Every part of me still felt like it was in motion, like stopping was not safe, even though I was no longer in danger the way I had been before. "You sound like you have seen this before," I said, a small hint of curiosity breaking through everything else. There was a brief pause, not long, but enough to register, before he answered. "I have," he said simply. The response did not come with explanation, but it did not need one. I lowered my gaze again, focusing on the glass in my hands, the steady surface of the water reflecting the light above, calm and still in a way I was not yet capable of. "The room you were given is yours," he said after a moment. "No one will enter without your permission." I looked up again, that statement catching my attention immediately. "And the rest of the house?" I asked. His expression did not change. "You will not enter without mine," he replied. The balance was clear. The boundary was defined. I nodded slowly, the structure settling into place in my mind. Not comfortable, not easy, but understandable. He stepped back then, the space between us returning, but the presence did not disappear. It simply adjusted, like everything else here. "Get some sleep, Emily," he said, my name sounding different in his voice. Not unfamiliar, just more intentional. I hesitated for a second, something in me wanting to ask more, to understand more, but I knew it would not change anything tonight. So I turned, my steps quiet as I moved back toward the hallway, toward the room that was now mine, at least for now. But as I reached the doorway, I paused, something pulling me back, something I could not ignore. I glanced over my shoulder, meeting his gaze one more time. "Why did you stop?" I asked, the question that had been building since the beginning finally finding its way out. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different, sharper, more focused, like the answer mattered in a way everything else did not. Adrian held my gaze for a moment, longer than before. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "Because you did not look like someone who gives up," he said. The words settled into me in a way I did not expect. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just present. I turned away slowly after that, stepping into the room, closing the door behind me. But his answer stayed with me, echoing softly in the quiet. Because for the first time since everything began, I realized that maybe this was not just about survival anymore. Maybe it was about what came after.